A man, a plan, a canal, Panama. This impressive palindrome, much like the man-made waterway it refers to, runs the same forwards as it does backwards. The man of note was French diplomat Ferdinand de Lesseps, who had previous success with the construction of the Suez Canal connecting the Red Sea to the Mediterranean. His plan was to turn the isthmus into a sea-level canal in defiance of the advice from actual engineers, the much harsher climate, and rugged topography. Instead, believing that the power of steam engines and the human spirit could overcome any challenge posed by the natural world. Construction began on January 1st, 1881, and after 8 years, the effort was bankrupt, having spent the equivalent of $287 million US and resulting in the deaths of an estimated 22,000 workers, many of whom were brought from the Caribbean and treated little better than slaves. The U.S. eventually took over the effort, going so far as to help Panama achieve independence from Colombia due to treaties the latter had signed with the French, and abandoning the attempt to dig down to sea level and instead installing a series of stepwise locks that are still in use today, sending cargo forwards and backwards between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, saving them a journey of thousands of miles around the southern tip of South America. In 2018, writer and director Christopher Nolan had a similarly ambitious plan as the pre-production on his latest science fiction epic began. Little did the auteur know that a chance encounter between a person and a bat would infect the world with a novel coronavirus now named COVID-19. The resulting pandemic has shuttered theaters and long-delayed releases for films who need the box office open to make back their budgets. Eventually, in defiance of the filmmaker's insistence on the cinema experience, his ambitious and convoluted film about entropy-flipping secret agents was let out into the world in theaters where possible and streaming everywhere else, letting this Schrodinger's cat out of the box for good. But did the cat arrive alive or dead? This week on Science Sort of, we go forwards, and then backwards, and then forwards again to discuss TENET.
From ScienceSortOf.com, you're listening to Science Sort of.
Hello and welcome to Science Sort of. I'm Ryan Halpton along with my co-host for today, here to discuss things that definitely wish they were science. It's Jesse, the antagonist, Barrett Gove V.
Hi, how you doing? I am here to provide probably a contrary view, an antagonistic view, is what I imagine I'm here for.
Okay, so, this is mostly a show about science, but in the original envisioning of this show, it was also going to be a little bit more of a pop culture show, and sometimes I still have to scratch that itch, and so we talk about a movie, and Jesse and I have been watching a lot of movies this year in quarantine, and so who better to discuss this with? But first, I think we need to establish what we're drinking. So, Jesse,
Oh, yeah. I did bring a beverage to the table. What I've been doing a lot lately is going to the source, the local brewery, to get my beer, and I just get whatever hazy IPA they have going that day. It seems like it's always something new, and this time I have the Outer Realm hazy IPA from Original Pattern Brewery in Oakland, California, right in Jack London Square.
It's not what I thought you were going to be having, but...
Oh, should I get that instead?
No, I think you had your chance. You chose you made a different move, and here we are, dealing with the consequences. Well, I came prepared for either eventuality.
I do have to drive after this, so I'm having a beer, and I think that's probably the better call.
Shooting straight gin.
Then straight gin, yeah.
Okay, well, then of the two options sitting here on my desk, I will also open the beer. I have a beer from American Solera called The Magic Touch. It's a double IPA brewed with Monterey and Kohatu hops. Two hops I've never heard of. And this is made by American Solera, which is in North Haven, Connecticut.
Ooh.
But it has a pretty label, and it was a double IPA. And therefore, it was purchased by me.
That's all you need, really.
Yeah, I don't have we have a couple breweries nearby, I don't, they're not in my normal route of moving around my kind of part of the neighborhood. So I haven't been hitting them up during quarantine. I've just been relying on the excellent beer supply at the little local organic market, which is much closer to our apartment building and restocked regularly. And so I've just been working my way through the offerings there.
I'm quite fortunate to have two very good breweries in Original Pattern and Ghost Town Brewery nearby, both of which have a very good online order and curbside pickup system.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've done online ordering and curbside pickup once with Abe at a place he really likes in Virginia.
Is that West Virginia or East Virginia?
East Virginia.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk Tenet.
Yes.
I think it is worth pointing out that there will be spoilers. Kind of impossible to talk about this movie without spoiling it. So we are spoiling the 2020 science fiction action thriller film Tenet, written and directed by Christopher Nolan, starring John David Washington, Robert Pattinson, Elizabeth Debicki, Dimple Kapadia, Michael Caine, and Kenneth Branagh.
You know it. You know it.
Talk to us, Jesse. What are you thinking?
Well, you mentioned the spoiler warning. I think that is important because we are going to spoil it. But I also think this is the interesting case where it is a little. I think it's a little more difficult to spoil Tenet than a lot has been made of it. You know, I think a lot of people are very wary of spoilers. I'm very wary of spoilers. But now, having seen Tenet a number of times, I think it's kind of it's not really straightforward enough to spoil. I don't know that it works that way.
Even if you've only seen the trailer, you know that this is sort of the premise is John David Washington plays a guy who gets recruited into this mysterious organization called Tenet, and their organization's goal is by using weird sort of reverse time travel mechanics to prevent World War III. We don't know what World War III is based on the trailer. We find out in the movie World War III is the future waging war on us here in the present as sort of a middle finger for the climate damage our current world is doing that is leaving a much worse place for the future, and they're mad at us, and so they're fighting back by sending objects back in time to screw with us.
Which, legitimate gripe, I think.
Yeah, legitimate gripe. I've seen it done before, so, not an original idea. I'll be keeping track of those throughout the discussion here. If you read the graphic novel comic series Paper Girls by Brian K. Vaughan, that's basically the same thing. Came out first. And
Paper Girls came out first, but this is an idea he's been working on for 10 years.
Sure.
So I think it's fair to say that the future might be mad at us for trashing the planet is an idea multiple people could have come up with.
Yeah, that's fair. So the main guy we're following is John David Washington, and his character is never named. He's only known as the protagonist, which I find frustrating and snooty.
I feel the opposite. But I have a feeling I'm just going to keep saying that.
Oh, this is gonna be fun.
Let's stop there. Why don't you like that? I love that. He's called the protagonist.
Already done in The Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. The character's name was Hero Protagonist. So again, not an original idea. And I don't know, it's just annoying. Give the guy a name.
It's a little different to have his proper name be Hero Protagonist. And in this movie, he's just referred to as the protagonist. And I also I like the way they do it. It's kind of implied that the nomenclature fits into the whole spy world they've created. They refer to enemies as antagonists, and he's called the protagonist because he's in charge of this mission. Like, he's leading the mission. It's all, they make it into a nomenclature within the world. I think it works. I think it's fair.
That's fine. So the movie begins with him as like a special forces agent going into this terrorist attack on an opera. It's unclear what I guess he's CIA at that time, and ends up getting captured during that operation after getting his hands on this mysterious object, one of the MacGuffins of the movie. And then he tries to kill himself with a pill. Pill doesn't work, and he wakes up having passed this test that he was willing to kill himself with the suicide pill built into his suit jacket rather than give up any secrets, and that gets him access to this mysterious organization Tenet that kind of kicks off the events of the film. So
I want to pause here and just ask you a question, because I've made no hiding of the fact that I really love Tenet. I am a big fan of Tenet. I think it's great. I certainly don't expect everyone to feel the same way. I get that it's not going to be for everyone, but it is for me. I enjoy it, and it's everything that I wanted it to be. But you've been playing a little closer to the vest. How do you feel about Tenet?
I really liked it. I don't know that I'm not sure that it's good. That is my feeling.
Get out of here. Get out of here. Podcast over.
I've watched it twice so far. I feel like I have a pretty good handle on what actually happens in the movie, but I think it is a movie with issues, and I think a lot of those issues come down to Christopher Nolan's particular quirks as a filmmaker, and just him leaning super heavy into his Nolan-ness. And I'm starting to feel about Chris Nolan the way I felt about old Georgie Lucas during the prequels. Like, I think, is anyone telling this guy no? Like, because not all of his ideas in here are good. They're interesting, but I think they could have been done differently or done better. And in certain respects, and in other respects, I think it's a really kind of magnificent and amazing film visually to watch. But yeah, I think there's some issues. So
I agree with you that this is the most uncut Nolan we maybe have ever seen. It's mainlining Nolan off the back of Christopher Nolan. I mean, it's just him going for it in the biggest way. And I'm really here for it. It's also the Nolan that I think, I'm not an unapologetic Nolan stan, like I'm not Interstellar doesn't really work for me. There are definitely times where Nolan, all of the timeline in Dark Knight Rises makes no sense. It's absolute nonsense. I'm not out here just praising Nolan for every little sneeze he makes, but this is the most Nolan speaking directly to me. This is my version of Nolan. This is everything I would have wanted from Nolan, and I just loved every minute of it.
Except you didn't get to see it in a theater.
That's the part I didn't like. Yes. Well, that brings up an interesting point, right? Because it's hard to separate Tenet from how Tenet came to us, how Tenet came into the world, which because of COVID-19 and because of the stubbornness of Christopher Nolan and Warner Brothers
their stubbornness was for two different reasons, which is also interesting.
It's completely botched. It was absolute nonsense. That's where Nolan frustrated me the most, was in the release of Tenet.
Because Nolan wants this to be a theater experience on the big screen, all this other stuff. Well, Warner Brothers just wants to make their money back on this movie that cost them a lot. And yeah, I guess to get into sort of the meat of the story, the protagonist, John David Washington, finds out that this organization Tenet is obviously a palindrome. It's spelled forwards the same as backwards and is part of a larger palindrome that we'll talk about here in a minute. He finds out from this scientist lady that there are these objects that keep getting found that are traveling backwards in time. Their entropy has been reversed. So at some point in the future, the people in the future started sending these objects back at us. And it seems like they're doing so as an act of aggression. And it is possible for people to also be put into this state of reverse entropy, which is how a lot of the weird timey-wimey-ness of this movie happens. Another thing I find go ahead.
Oh, I would just point out that the scientist lady is none other than Clemence Posey, who you're a big fan of.
What else has she been in?
A little movie called In Bruges.
Oh yeah, I like In Bruges. Really good.
Yeah, there you go.
Christopher Nolan has been, I think another thing that's a little pretentious is Christopher Nolan has been very picky about saying it's not a time travel movie because they're just inverting entropy and it's all quantum physics. And I'm kind of like, all right, look, this is a time travel movie. I find that very annoying. I know that he had Kip Thorne, the theoretical physicist, help him on the science of this movie, but like there's not a whole lot of there. Like Interstellar, they actually made a model and ran a computer simulation that rethought how we understood the physics of black holes, which is awesome and fascinating. If you ignore how big a bummer it is that it takes a Hollywood movie budget to actually progress science at this point in our collapsing civilization. So, but like, what was Kip Thorne doing on this movie? Was he just saying, yep, sometimes things go backwards, like it's quantum, waves hands, walks away? Like, I don't, so that part I find a little baffling, but we find out.
I mean, that's fair. But that too seems like a lot of the gripes with Tenet, including my own with the release, are about things around Tenet around the release of Tenet and around the production of Tenet, and the conversation around Tenet is very frustrating. But Tenet's pretty great.
So John David Washington then meets Neil, played by Robert Pattinson, and they end up becoming like an venturing team, venture buddies together for the rest of the movie.
Is this where I should talk about John David Washington and Robert Pattinson?
Sure.
So this movie has John David Washington and Robert Pattinson in it, and Elizabeth Debicki. It has those three people in it who are maybe my three favorite actors. I mean, I don't know. They're up there. And the fact that they put all three of them in the movie and just have scene after scene of them doing amazing action set pieces, followed by having elegant conversations on the Amalfi Coast, is all you need for a movie, pretty much. I don't know.
Yeah, so I think, the way this movie was shot and sort of the jumping from locale to locale comes off very much like a James Bond movie, and I think that's on purpose. So Nolan has even said that, if Inception was sort of his way to do a sci-fi heist movie, Tenet is his way to do a sci-fi spy movie.
Yeah. It's very much in the vein of James Bond, Mission Impossible, or at least the McQuarrie Mission Impossibles. Like it's.
If there's a scene of John David Washington in a suit driving a fancy boat around a yacht with Elizabeth Debicki lounging in the back seat,
it's probably a Bond movie.
That is straight out of a Bond movie.
And that's great.
Yeah. No, I didn't dislike those aspects of it. I would love to see an actual Christopher Nolan Bond movie and to see him just like try to actually play it straight and not introduce any high concept stuff and just do like, if he had that level of restraint where he had to just do the Bond formula, what would that movie look like?
I'm less interested in that.
Yeah, I just think it'd be interesting. And eventually, so they meet Sator, who is Kenneth Branagh's character, who is the Russian bad guy. And he grew up in this secret city, which I love that concept. And I believe that is a real thing, right? There were Soviet secret cities. And we find out eventually, and I guess I can spoil ahead of what happens just because it's all weird time stuff. Like, he grew up in this secret nuclear city where he was having to like dig up the rubble, Chernobyl style. And he finds this vault and he opens it and it's a bunch of gold bars from the future and instructions on how to start messing stuff up. And because it's this box of gold bars has been traveling backwards in time and they hid it in the rubble of this collapsed Soviet city. And I thought that was really cool. I thought like the sort of origin and motivations of him as a character were really kind of dark and twisted and fascinating and fun.
And I think that it like you said, he's the Russian bad guy, which is such a trope, but it kind of justifies it a little more than normally because it's pulling off these things that are very tied to the Soviet Union, secret cities, nuclear sites. It's definitely, it's not just making him Russian for the sake of Russian, Yep, I agree. And he's married to Elizabeth Debicki's character, who's Debicki!
And she's an arts dealer. And that part, this is where the movie started to lose me the first time. I think I got it a little bit better the second time. But basically, she's an art dealer who screwed up and accidentally sold a forgery as if it was the real thing.
A Goya.
Yeah, I'm always confused by because I'm like, if the forgery's that good, then just enjoy it. Right? Like,
sure.
I don't understand art people in that sense. The forgery is made by a guy named Arepo. And so at this point, do we want to explain the Sator Square?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the addition of Arepo seems like the right time.
Oh, and the heist or the opening terrorist attack is at an opera. So for folks who don't know, the name of the movie Tenet is a reference to the Sator Square or Rotas Square, because it works the same as it does forwards and backwards, which is a 5-word Latin palindrome that is one of the most impressive palindromes ever. It's amazing. So the full 5-word phrase is Sator, Arepo, Tenet, Opera, Rotas. And the cool thing about it is it works the same forwards as it does backwards, but when you write it out as a square, so each word gets its own line and you stack them up, it also works vertically. So you can start in the upper left-hand corner and read down and then read it as columns and then go back and it works the same. It's incredible. So it's like a multi-axial palindrome.
If you're not driving or whatnot, definitely worth Googling Sator Square and just looking at it, because it's kind of fun to take in.
And it's doesn't have a super clear meaning. It might have sort of been a joke, or it might have sort of been something that was done only because it worked as this Sator Square. It seems to have something to do with a person planting seeds named Arepo, holding on to the work or the care or the effort of the wheels or the cause of rotation. So like I said, it kind of doesn't make sense, but you can kind of think of it in terms, I'm guessing what Nolan took from it is the person who founded a thing is working hard to preserve it and to keep the wheel spinning, which is sort of what the protagonist character is doing throughout the movie, right?
Yeah, I mean, in Tenet, specifically the Tenet part of it is to hold on and to try to, which fits with the protagonist trying to hold on to order and trying to hold on to the world.
So they end up going to Oslo, where there's this place called a Freeport, which is also a real thing. It's these places
which is so cool
that sort of exist outside of taxable jurisdictions at
Speaking
airports.
Of not understanding art dealers and art people, they apparently have these things called Freeports. What are they doing with all this money?
You spend $9 million on a fake Goya and you don't even want to put it up somewhere. You just want to store it. And they're tax shelters, right? You put it in this vault
100%.
At this airport, and essentially you can't get taxed on it. So, and these are real things. They exist. What we find out is that there's like 5 layers to this Freeport, which I thought was a little confusing, but made a little bit more sense on the second watch through. And at the center of the Pentagon is this machine that right when Neil and the protagonist approach it, they approach it on 2 sides of a pane of glass, and a guy comes running out of, or 2 guys come running out of the machine. One of them tackles Robert Pattinson, runs past him. The other fights with John David Washington. We later realize that that's the same person.
It's known as a turnstile.
Yes, it is known as a turnstile. And we find out later that that's the same person. And what we're seeing on Robert Pattinson's side is them running out of the inverter. And on John David Washington's side, they're running into the inverter. And this is where we get our first scene where, like, some characters are moving forward in time, other characters are moving backwards in time. It's very trippy to watch. It looks cool. I have no idea how they filmed it.
I was watching a documentary about it. Okay. It was very complicated.
Sounds like Nolan.
I mean, it's complicated in part because there are so few VFX going into it.
Right. Yeah, it's very practical looking. And I have to believe that part of Nolan's conception of this whole idea has to do with the ability of, because, like, there's that whole thing of Inception being, it's a sci-fi heist movie, but it's also a movie about making movies, right?
Right. One of my favorite things about Inception is Inception is one of the Christopher Nolan movies that I really like. I'm a big fan of Inception, in part because of this thing that was presented to me as a theory, but when you understand it and rewatch Inception, you go, oh no, this is entirely what this movie is about. This is very blatant, but it's a movie about making movies. The cast of Inception all line up to different members of a production crew, starting, of course, with Leonardo DiCaprio's Cobb, who is not only acting as the director of the movie they're putting together, but is also dresses entirely like Christopher Nolan. His hair looks like Christopher Nolan's hair. Like he's very blatantly being Christopher Nolan. And then you have Joseph Gordon-Levitt in the producer role, and you have Elliot Page. Ariadne is designing the dreamscapes. So that's the writer. He's the writer of the story, which also I've heard it explained. It works on a bunch of different levels because Ariadne's like this young up and coming writer and kind of just gets dragged along with Cobb's vision and is eventually like, you need me on set because somebody needs to deal with all this nonsense. And there's that great scene in Inception, spoiler alert for Inception, where they're in the dreamscape and a train just comes running through the scene, and Ariadne's like, I didn't put that train there. And it's like a director who's like, no, we need a train to go through here, because
it'll look cool. Yeah.
It'll look awesome.
And then Tom Hardy's the actor, and that's why he can
Right.
change his appearance and play different characters within the dream. And then Ken Watanabe's like the studio because he's the big money at the top, you know.
Right, and it's the Tom Hardy thing that really brought it home for me, because there's a scene where he's literally at a makeup mirror in the dreamscape, getting ready to pretend to be Tom Berenger, and it's like, oh no, they're very blatantly doing all this. This is not subtle. That's what it's about.
And then the deeper, the kind of metatext behind that is that if the point of Inception as a plot is to convince, Cillian Murphy's character, is it Cillian or Cillian? Cillian Murphy's character is the audience,
Right?
Because he's the one they're trying to convince of something, and that's sort of this idea of like, if Inception works within the context of the story, then the movie Inception also works with you as the audience member watching it, because they're putting the idea into your head just as much as they're putting the idea into Murphy's head.
Right.
So it's pretty cool.
Yusuf, who
is the drug dealer.
Is the drug dealer. he's like the DP or production designer. It works all the way down until you get to Mal, and that's Marion Cotillard's character, and that's where it gets really interesting. Is what role does Mal play in this as a movie production?
Well, I think instead of going down that rabbit hole, I think I want to switch back to Tenet a little bit, and I think Tenet fits in that same mold of Christopher Nolan wanting to think and talk about film in his movies as much as he wants to have whatever other high concept. And I think Tenet is playing on this idea that you can run a film backwards and forwards. Like it does, that is a thing you can do with old fashioned film reels, you know?
Yeah. That's
how you rewind them. Like you don't, and I think this is sort of his like way of saying, like, in an analog world with film, like you could reverse the entropy of the characters in your movie.
Interesting. Yeah.
So anyway, that's sort of my high concept of what I think it might be another layer of what he was trying to do with Tenet. But so we were introduced to the concept of the turnstile, which is the machine from the future that allows objects to have their entropy reversed. And what was next? They
chase the two men who are actually one man, who are actually John David Washington from his future. And they both end up getting away, and they go to the Amalfi Coast to tell Elizabeth Debicki that they've destroyed the Goya, even though they haven't.
But then by that point, the Goya is almost not important to the story anymore. It's all about this MacGuffin, which is a thing called Algo 9. It's a piece of an algorithm from the future that, if connected to the other 8 MacGuffins, will destroy the world.
Right. Explained by Priya.
Explained by Priya, who's the arms dealer who's selling inverted bullets, which are apparently deadlier than regular bullets, which pretty deadly.
No, she sold regular bullets that Sator then converted into inverted bullets. But she's fronting as an arms dealer. She's also a member of Tenet.
I don't know about that.
She's definitely a member of Tenet.
She knows what Tenet is. I don't know if she's a member. All right.
No, she's a high-ranking member of Tenet. She thinks she's the protagonist.
I don't know. This might be where we start to disagree on things.
She's an extremely high-ranking member of Tenet. She's sending John David Washington, the protagonist, on missions. She's telling him what to do.
Yeah, I guess. Okay, that's fair.
He's getting a lot of his instruction from her. She just doesn't know. Well, spoiler for the very end of the movie, she just doesn't know that he's actually the founder of Tenet, because he is the main protagonist.
But he hasn't done it yet.
He hasn't founded Tenet. He will found Tenet in the future.
This is like, do you remember in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, they have that book about time travel grammar?
Yeah. It's it needs its own grammar. But here's the thing. You can go back and explaining Tenet is insanely complicated, and this is what I was saying about spoilers, right?
Well, I only want to touch on a few more plot points, and then we can talk about whatever. So then they have the car chase that we all saw bits of in the trailer. This is where they're kicking the MacGuffin around, and then at the end of the car chase, Elizabeth Debicki is shot with an inverted bullet, and so the only way to keep her alive is to invert her. So now she's traveling backwards in time. And so John David Washington and Neil invert too, and they realize that there was this explosion at the secret Soviet city days before the events of the movie even started, with the scene at the opera. And
Aaron Taylor Johnson shows up.
It's true.
With a big beard. And he also inverts.
So now we've got this entire squad going back in time to get to before the movie even starts so that they can have the final big battle sequence at the secret city, recover the MacGuffin in time to save the world, because if the explosion happens because Kenneth Branagh also goes back in time to die, and once he dies, he's got a dead man switch that sets off the bomb. The bomb sets off the algorithm from the future. If the algorithm goes off, all of time is destroyed. And that's bad.
The bomb buries the algorithm. If he dies, what will be, in theory, what will happen is he will communicate to the future where the algorithm is buried. They will unbury it and activate it.
Yeah. Okay. That was not my understanding, but that makes as much sense as what I think I just said. And I think you're probably closer to the mark of what the movie was trying to communicate. I've only watched it twice, so what should I know?
I watched it a third time.
Yeah, I know you did. So then the final battle happens, and it's this 10-minute sequence where John David Washington is on the red team, literally red teams and blue teams. The red team are moving forward in time. The blue team is moving backwards in time.
They're moving in a temporal pincer movement.
Yeah, that was all right.
No, it's amazing. It's amazing. It's so good.
So basically, the soldiers moving backwards in time can give the soldiers moving forward in time tactical information that they wouldn't know ahead of time, if that makes sense. So I thought this as a climax, it looked cool, it sounded cool. Ludwig Göransson is a genius.
A genius. We need to have a longer Ludwig Göransson talk, and Absolutely. We can do that now, or we can do that later.
I just want to say this final climactic battle sequence, I don't think worked. and this is sort of the emotional climax of the movie, as much as Christopher Nolan ever has emotional climaxes, where we find out that Neil has been sort of in the background helping John David Washington all along, and he has this memory of their relationship that is different than John David Washington's, because all of his memories of their relationship happen after the events of the movie, as they're starting Tenet and working backwards in time to do all these things. And then he dies in the battle, but he dies kind of like saying like, okay, I'll see you later, John David Washington, because you and I are going to be great friends. You just don't know it yet. And I thought that was a cool moment. I didn't think it quite landed, just because Christopher Nolan, not always the best with human emotions, sort of like our boy George Lucas. And they save the day. John David Washington agrees to help Debicki if she ever gets in trouble again, and then he just starts moving on in the future to found Tenet at some point.
And she does get into trouble again, and he does save her.
Yep. So,
okay, I think I understand the gripe with the final act. I think the first time I watched it, I was like, "This is really pretty. I have no idea what's happening," but the second time I watched it, I was like, all right, I'm starting to get a feel for, red team, blue team, where everybody's going, but it's still kind of a mishmash. By the third time, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I thought that it was so well put together. And so it really worked for me. And you can complain that there's a reasonable gripe that a movie should not have to be watched 3 times before the final battle makes sense. But I would argue that I enjoyed it on a different level each time, but I enjoyed it each time. And I think that's kind of a feat in and of itself, that it has such rewatchability that I can enjoy it on a different level each time. And as for the reveal at the end that Neil, Robert Pattinson, is someone who was recruited by John David Washington, by the protagonist in the future, and they've known each other for years in John David Washington's future, but in Robert Pattinson's past, that landed for me the first time. I really like that. Maybe I don't understand human emotions as well. And I'm willing to accept that, that might be a failing on me, but I think this is just worlds apart from George Lucas having
yeah.
a man and woman interact and talking about how much they hate sand. You know,
I hate sand as much as the next guy, but
yeah.
And on second viewing, there's hints of their relationship having been deeper than
that first scene with them. That first scene with the two of them is it's an electric scene already. I love that scene. Then leading into the
bungee jump scene,
the bungee jumpable scene. But the first scene, he says he orders a vodka tonic and a Diet Coke for him, for John David Washington, and the protagonist, John David Washington, is like, how are you ordering my drink for me? And he says, you don't drink on the job. And he passes it off as him doing his homework, but it all falls into place.
Yeah. I think it sort of works as a reveal, but it sort of exposes, I think, my biggest criticism of the movie. And it's that this is only half a story. And I know Christopher Nolan's probably very proud of that, but I find it incredibly frustrating. And now there's I feel like half this movie is missing.
The half where the protagonist sets up Tenet and builds out this.
Yeah, I basically feel like the movie stopped at the halfway point of telling a full story, and I would like a full story, please. Unless you put Tenet Part 1 on the end of this. And I don't believe that Jonathan Nolan is going to revisit this universe or this storyline or anything like that. That's not his style. So I'm not expecting a sequel to Tenet, but I do feel like this is not a complete story. And that's an issue for me.
I guess I didn't feel that way at all.
That's fine.
It's a perfectly valid feeling. And as you pointed out, I guess I can see what you're saying, but this is very much the crux of the story, right? Because it's where the algorithm is threatened. You know, the secret agency that the protagonist will eventually found is set up to stop Sator from doing this in this moment. And so this is definitely the crux of that story. And it really, so I watched a couple other Nolan movies this week just because I was in the zone, feeling in the zone.
We should also probably point out that you're quarantined right now. So
I am quarantined right now. So I got a lot of time to watch movies. And so I was watching Tenet, and I really enjoyed Tenet, as I've made clear. And so I was feeling more Christopher Nolan. I went back and I watched following his first movie, which is the only one that I hadn't seen before. And I also watched Memento. I rewatched Memento, which I haven't seen in a while. And I rewatched Dunkirk. And it struck me that Tenet might be the most straightforward movie that Christopher Nolan's ever made.
This feels like now you're just taking the piss.
No. At least in one sense, it definitely is. And it's the sense that this movie is a complete story in that it's what happens to the protagonist during this time. It proceeds completely completely in a linear manner for the protagonist. We start at one point, and even though we are going back and forth in time in terms of the main timeline, if that even exists, the movie is very.
But you're basically saying we never leave the protagonist's POV, and so we're with him the whole time, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Well, but we're not necessarily always with him, because there are times that it's just Sator and Kat on the yacht going back and forth. You know, there are times that we leave the protagonist's spatial point of view, but we're always with him temporally, and we're always along that line. And so in that sense, it's completely abnormal for Christopher Nolan, who even from his earliest work which is Following, which is like an hour and 10-minute black and white, almost student film. In that movie, he plays around with bruising on the protagonist's face, another unnamed protagonist. I think he's in the credits as the man, but he or something like that. But he doesn't have a name, but he he has all this bruising on his face that he gets at some point in the movie. And so you learn to identify where you're at in the timeline by when he gets a haircut and when he has bruising on his face, and it jumps all around. And Memento, of course, famously plays backwards and forwards and meets in the middle. But this movie is temporally clean. It is just moving forward with the protagonist. And
which that's, it's not actually a time travel movie.
Again, the conversation around Tenet is its own thing, but the movie is super straightforward. And I really like that he's even seemingly poking fun at himself, because at the beginning of the movie, as we discussed, starts with this raid on an opera in Kiev. And it's the protagonist leading the raid. At this point, he's just a CIA operative. He's not a Tenet operative. And he...
Can I interrupt you to talk about the slide under the like, tall table moment? Where John David Washington's running and he drops to the slide to get to the car rack.
Oh, yeah. It's a great moment.
That is a great moment.
Yeah.
I could just watch that on a Tenet-like loop.
Yeah. It's really good.
It just looks so cool.
There are a couple of moments. There are more than a couple. There are several moments in this movie that are they activate some ASMR part of my brain that's just it's so delightful. I just want to sit in those moments.
The difference in physicality between the three main good guys, Debicki, Washington, and Pattinson, is really fun to watch because John David Washington, he moves a bit like a bruiser at times.
He's a former NFL wide receiver.
Also, like they're so different in height, which is kind of funny for a movie where there are characters that we're not supposed to know who they are, but it's like, oh, but this guy's the exact same height as this kind of short John David Washington. And Elizabeth Debicki is tall enough to drive a car from the back seat. And
while handcuffed.
Yeah, no, that was kind of funny. It's really cool visually to watch the three of them play around on screen together. But I interrupted your point about the flow of time in the opera and poking fun of himself. So
they start with the raid on the opera in Kiev. And then he's picked up by these Russians who are trying to find the piece of the algorithm. And, they're brutal. They take out his teeth and he eventually takes that supposed cyanide capsule to kill himself. And it cuts to the title of the movie, Tenet, as he's lying supposedly dead on the ground dying, in Kiev, in this railway station. And then it cuts to him waking up in a hospital and Martin Donovan explaining where he is. But in that moment, I definitely fell for it. I was like, oh, now we've jumped much earlier, right? Like we just saw how he died and now we're much earlier and we're going to work our way back to that. In classic Nolan fashion, it's all over the place timeline wise. And he's like, no, that was not a real cyanide pill. We're moving forward. We're going forward. And I thought it was fun for him to play with his own tropes that way.
A little. And I agree that the straightforward read of that is probably correct, because I think sometimes people expect Nolan to be too clever by half, and I think a lot of times he is. But there's already a theory online that the cyanide pill is real. John David Washington does die. And the Martin Donovan, they recover his body, invert him until he's alive again and his teeth are fixed, and then undo the cyanide out of his system and wake him back up.
Yeah, sure, maybe. I mean, because Nolan theories, that's one of the less interesting ones. I think it doesn't really add anything. It doesn't add anything to the movie once you know what the movie's about. The only reason I think there's even a chance that that's true or implied is that Kenneth Branagh is going to kill himself at some point in the movie because he's got terminal cancer, and that's why he wants to blow up the whole world and let the future win their war on us. He has a cyanide pill he's going to take that's the exact same style as the protagonist at the beginning of the movie. Yeah, and he calls it a gift from the CIA. So that was just a thought I had, or a theory I read. It's an interesting theory, and the fact that kind of gets at a broader point about why I like this movie so much, and why I kind of don't want a Christopher Nolan Bond movie, why I want this movie, which is that I love that that is a theory that you could go down. Like there's it's such a rich text, and that you can find all these little Reddit theories that you don't need to find. Like your enjoyment of the movie is not diminished by not sussing out whether or not John David Washington is actually killed in the train yard.
A lot of the fan theories that I'm a fan of a fan theory.
Me too.
And a lot of the ones, there's a trope in fan theories that I kind of hate, and it's basically like X character is secretly X this other character. Like Dario Naharis is secretly your own Greyjoy.
Are we talking about the Max is Neil theory?
Yeah, it's dumb. It adds nothing to the movie. It doesn't make any logical sense. Like they have different names, they have different hair. Nolan clearly only cares about kids as motivation. That's why he never shows their faces. Like he's not interested in kids as characters.
Yeah.
So I don't think he's going to make this secret reveal that the kid was Neil the whole time. I don't buy it for a second, and it doesn't need to be there. It doesn't add anything to the movie.
I do think it makes a little more sense than you're giving it credit for, than I see a lot of people giving it credit for. I think there's a little more to go off of there. I
think Max's Ives makes more sense than Max's Neil.
Max's Ives is also interesting, but specifically with Neil kind of being very concerned about the protagonist not giving the right information to Sator. Oh, you endangered Kat's life that way. And there's just a few little things in Pattinson's performance that I think you could pick up on. But whether or not Neil is Max is less important than the fact that you can find those things in this text. That there's enough to this movie that if you want to meditate on it and really dig in on it, that's there for you. And you can search those things out and question those things. But if you don't give a shit and you just want to watch something stunningly beautiful, that was like a heartbreaking labor for, tons of people to put this movie together with.
Well, there are a lot of movies that describes. It's not.
No, it's not. It's not though. Compare the Mission Impossible movies and the Bond movies, which I love the Bond movie. No, I love the Mission Impossible movies. I love the last three. The first three.
Yeah, I'm more of a Bond. I think I'm more of a Bond guy than you are.
Correct, and I'm more of a Mission Impossible guy. But the last three Mission Impossible movies, I love. I've watched them a million times. And
we saw a Mission Impossible movie in the theaters together and didn't like it that much.
No, we did. We were more excited about going to it for the
Christopher Nolan Batman Dark Knight Rises pre-roll that we couldn't hear a word of because they hadn't ADR'd all of Bane's audio dialogue yet, so it was a complete waste of time. That's funny, Jesse. We're moving backwards and forwards through our Batman Nolan Mission Impossible.
It all circles back around. But the Ghost Protocol, that was Ghost Protocol. Ghost Protocol is okay. I like Ghost Protocol, but I really love Rogue Nation and I really love Fallout. But those movies it's because they're stunningly beautiful and they have that aspect, and it's a lot of practical effects, and it's a lot of Tom Cruise doing his own stunts, hanging off the side of an airplane and doing that stuff. And that's great. And I watch those movies, and I watch the Bond movies too. And they're great, but half the time I don't know really what's going on. I know generally.
Oh, so you're like one of the actors in Tenet.
The Robert Pattinson not knowing anything that was going on the entire time is beautiful. I love it.
And John David Washington. None of the actors in this movie knew what was going on.
Yes,
and which
100%.
I think that's a problem.
I don't think it's a problem. I do not think it's a problem. And if you'll let me get to it, I'll say why.
Okay,
you can.
Please, I'll allow it, but be brief, prosecutor or counselor.
Whoa! Did you just call me a prosecutor? You just called me a prosecutor. I am not a prosecutor.
You are defending this movie.
I am a public defender, and right now, Tenet is the public, and I will defend it as long as it requires. But the you can enjoy Mission Impossible, you can enjoy Bond on that level. And I rewatch the Mission Impossible movies, especially a bunch of times. And usually when I by the third or fourth time, I'm starting to figure out what's going on exactly. And it's like, oh, cool. It's pretty much what I figured. It's kind of boring. It's full of things that don't really matter, but it's kind of loose and whatever. It's fine. It's not rewarding in any way. I'm really just watching it to see Tom Cruise hanging off an airplane, and that's great, and I love it, and I'm gonna keep watching it. This movie, how is a marriage of two kinds of movies, right? It's the movie that rewards the rewatch. You enjoy it on one level the first time you watch it, and it's that same level that you're enjoying Bond and you're enjoying Mission Impossible. But when you go back to it, it has so much waiting for you, and it has so much to reward you if you want it, or you can just watch it for the amazing images of John David Washington beating somebody with a cheese grater. Like that's there too. You can enjoy that, or you can go deeper and try to figure out whether or not Max is a time traveler. Sorry, not time traveler, entropy traveler. Like
this is what annoys me, Jesse, is we are all time travelers. We just all happen to be moving forward continuously through time all of our lives. So everyone's a time travel. Every movie's a time travel movie. We live in the fourth dimension. Christopher Nolan, Kip Thorne lied to you, and listen to me instead.
Now you sound like Christopher Nolan. You've made Christopher Nolan's point. Because if every time movie's a time travel movie, then the term doesn't make sense as used. And so, yeah, it's not a time travel movie. You just made Christopher Nolan's point for him.
No, it is a time travel movie. They're traveling through time all the time.
But you just said every movie's a time travel movie.
So then this one is too.
That's a boring point.
But most directors don't go around saying, "Oh, don't you dare call my movie a time travel movie."
I mean, yeah, he's pretentious, but the movie's good. So who cares?
All right, as long as we can agree that it's pretentious, I'm happy with that.
Christopher Nolan is an extremely pretentious individual. Dude, Following is about a writer who has literally nothing going on and just follows people for his entertainment and eventually goes around wearing suits, even though he has no day job. Like the dude's always been like a pretentious dude. It's fine.
The scene with Michael Caine, with Sir Michael Caine, who was just like, they didn't even change his name.
He's lunch.
Yeah, he's just Sir Michael. It's like he's already okay. Michael Caine. And the whole
Michael Caine has earned that. Hold on, Michael Caine has earned just showing up and saying, "Nah, this guy's Michael. It's fine."
Listen. I don't begrudge Michael Caine at all. But the whole discourse around like, "Oh, your suit sucks. Go get a nicer suit." And then like, let me recommend a place. And then he says, "No, I don't need you to recommend a place." Hey, you do. You don't already have a tailor in London. That's ridiculous. You're a CIA operative. You don't have a bespoke suit guy in London. And B, like, that was so unnecessary. Like, just give John David Washington a nice suit to start them. If you're going to do your riff on a James Bond movie, just have him in nice suits the whole time. That was completely unnecessary.
No, because it fits into the attempt, and I'm not going to say it's an entirely successful attempt, but the attempt for Nolan to speak about class issues, especially with relation to Bond movies. There's a whole class element to the whole movie that, I mean, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. I'm not gonna opine too much.
Also, like, you put John David Washington in a pretty nice suit already. So it's just extra pretentious to be like, "Oh, that suit isn't nice enough because we're British and we can tell."
But that comes back around, because then he's having a conversation with Kat Barton, Elizabeth Debicki, and she's like, "You're wearing the suit, but you still don't understand that it costs $9 million to go on vacation."
Listen, I might have some unresolved issues around the time I went to a wedding in Europe and realized that none of my suits fit. Okay.
Now we're getting to it.
These are my issues. I don't have a Savile Row guide. I don't know. I'm just saying, I spent some time at the tailor after that wedding and realized that I needed to get some things shaped up, literally.
I like that Christopher Nolan is trying to speak on these class issues in these movies. I like that he's making the attempt. It comes up a lot with the Freeport as well. The Freeport has fire protocols that remove all the oxygen from the room.
Rather, kill the people working in the free port.
Right. It would kill all of the staff members, but the art would be safe from water damage. And they're like, and Robert Pattinson goes, "Isn't that bad for the employees?" And they're like, "Well, we really care about your artwork here."
Well, he says we give them a 10-second warning.
Yeah, we give them 10 seconds. It's fine. And he's trying to speak to those class issues. It's better than ignoring it. You know, like it's a Bond movie where they're, you know, driving private yachts. Like I think it's better than ignoring it.
I believe The Help is driving that yacht. And anyway, you know what we did, Jesse? We talked about this movie for an hour, and then we ended our discussion talking about the beginning of the movie.
It's perfect. Like Tenet. It's a perfect movie. Wait, no. I'm not done talking about this movie.
Well, we're going final thoughts.
We have not talked about Kat Barton and Elizabeth Debicki enough.
We didn't even ever get back to Ludwig Göransson.
We didn't even get back to Ludwig Göransson. So
all right, say your piece on Debicki. Quick side chat up on Göransson. And then I want your final thoughts. And then I want your rating. And then I want to go.
Okay. All right. That's fair. I love Kat Barton. I love Kat Barton. I think she's an amazing fucking character and is not getting enough credit in the film Twitter sphere that I inhabit as being a bad. And I see, you know, I get that there's way too many mother characters in film. Like she's constantly talking about how she's a mother and how she cares and how she just cares about her son. But especially, you know, the more times I watch this, the more I pick apart that performance and how much she is holding on to the fact that she's a mother because she feels like such. Because there's this moment earlier in Vietnam where I love the globetrottingness of this movie, but there's this moment earlier in Vietnam where Sator says, "Hey, I will let you leave. You can get your divorce and get out of this relationship, but I'm keeping the son. I'm keeping our son." And she feels in herself in that moment the temptation of that, of just saying like, "All right, you know, bye son, I got to get the fuck out of there." And there's all these little moments where she goes to pick up Max from school or even just say hi to him on the way from school. And he's not, you see, like, she's like trying to like mother him and like be on top of him, and he's just not feeling it. And then she's playing it so well. Like the reaction of her, it's all these subtle little things that Elizabeth Debicki is doing that invest that character with so much more complicated motivations. The reason she keeps coming back to her being a mother, is because she's trying to convince herself of these things. And and she just feels like this torment with what society does, which is constantly tell people that tell women that they need to be better mothers. I have a young daughter. She's 8 months old tomorrow, and and I know that my wife is constantly feeling bombarded by pressures to be a better mother that she doesn't need to feel because she's an amazing mother, and pressures that I don't feel because I'm a man and I'm a dad, and it's different for me. And I love that this movie put that central in the middle of an action movie, that she felt those pressures, was resentful of those pressures, and like a bad just decides to take that out on Sator, not only eventually getting the KO on him, shooting him in the chest like a bat, then diving off the boat, being the free woman that she always wanted to be, that she wanted to be as she saw herself in the past, but also cutting the cord on the boat. We didn't even talk about the boat race. Haupt, the boat race. There is a scene in this movie.
Yeah, there's a very long Thomas Crown Affair homage. I don't think we need to get into it.
No, it's so good. Sator asked the protagonist if he sails, and he's like, yeah. And then that was the sailing was this like competitive racing boats that is just
they're like America's Cup catamaran racing sailboats.
it was just this amazing scene. I've never seen anything like that scene, and it
except in the Thomas Crown Affair, starring noted James Bond Pierce Brosnan.
I saw
noted
that. I saw that. It didn't register as much, but the culminating with Kat cutting Sator's lifeline and trying to drown him, and then being pissed about it, about the protagonist saving him. It's a great scene. Kat Barton, who I wonder about that name too. Is that a Hawkeye reference? Because she's got Clint Barton's last name and Kate Bishop's first name. I don't know, but it's loose. But I really like that character. I see. It's also, it's Nolan has his problems, and he's not particularly good at writing female characters, but he does have some good ones, and I think this is a good one. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't have a dead wife in this movie, which, I know that's not a lot of progress. I don't know if he gets a gold star for that, but it's better. I don't know. I like Kat Barton a lot. I think she's a bad character, and I think Elizabeth Debicki plays her perfectly.
And then Ludwig Göransson just crushing it on those keys. I agree with everything you said, and that was why I didn't butt in. You said all. I think all that needs to be said, at least as far as my view on that character and her performance. So well said, well articulated, well reinforced with
thank you
textual evidence.
I'll just add a quick recommendation to watch Widows as well if you haven't been watching Widows. Elizabeth Debicki, watch Widows.
Like, it's not a TV show; it's a single movie. If you haven't been watching, just put it.
If you watch it enough times, then it becomes watching.
Tell me about Ludwig Göransson and your feelings.
It's maybe my favorite score since 2014's Gone Girl. It's beautiful. Ludwig Göransson is an amazing talent. I know you're a big fan. I'm going to let you speak to how he got his start in films.
He did the music for Community.
That's right.
And he got his green card to come to the U.S. because of a genius visa. Because of his musical prowess. Like, he was so...
Because he's a genius.
Dan Harmon got him across the border from Sweden. And he did the music for Black Panther. He did the music for the Creed movies, Fruitvale Station, Mandalorian. So, I love the music in Mandalorian. And I thought the music in this was incredible. I know Christopher Nolan usually works with... Help me out here.
Hans Zimmer. Hans Zimmer is busy doing Dune, which Jesse's very excited about. There might be another special edition. Extremely excited about Dune.
So we had to slum it with Ludwig Göransson, which not slumming because Ludwig was amazing.
He's a certified genius.
And he figured out, he did this movie, he did the music for the movie after the pandemic had already hit. So he was doing a bunch of recording in people's homes, and he was not able to use the studios and didn't have all the resources, and he just did it anyway. Giant Hollywood movie recorded out of a closet. And he figured out how to make music work backwards and forwards in ways that is interesting, still good to listen to, but also incredibly informative for following the action as it occurs, because you need that clue. You need that audio little indicator of, are we moving forward in time and backward in time? And his music does that.
Yeah, it's
amazing.
It's amazing. It's an incredible feat, and just a joy to listen to. I've been listening to it for days now. It's great. There's that one song that two. Can I highlight two sections of music real quick?
Well, all I want to say is the one thing I find frustrating is, as much as I love the music, I think somebody needs to tell Chris Nolan that it's not okay to have the music completely drown out the dialogue in scenes, especially when the dialogue is essential to understanding what's happening in the movie. I was fortunate, I guess, that I could watch this movie at home and turn on subtitles. But I think as a storyteller, I get that he's trying to create a mood more than he's trying to create like necessarily a strict narrative, but like I think somebody's got to dial him back a little bit on that. And that's sort of what I was thinking about when I was saying stuff of like nobody is telling this guy no, and it's obvious and it needs to stop a little bit. So
the sound mixing issues are maybe his Achilles heel. I don't mind them as much as a lot of people, because I know I'm going to watch it again. Like, I know I'll probably get it eventually, but that goes back to the should you have to watch it multiple times. I've read I wanted to understand a little more, like, because this movie is definitely one of his worst offenders in terms of sound mixing, inaudible dialogue. And I wanted to understand a little more like why he was doing this. And what I found was that he doesn't do a lot of ADR. It's all on the set dialogue, and it's a part of his lack of VFX, like he's trying to make it naturalistic. And
but that's an issue. That's an issue if you film in IMAX cameras, because IMAX cameras are so loud that it's really hard to get. It's really hard to get good sound on a set when you're filming in IMAX. And so I think he needs to get off his high horse and do some ADR. I get that ADR is rough, but like somehow we have to convince him that his next greatest challenge is to figure out a perfect way to do ADR and fix ADR for the rest of us. Because I've done enough audio work, because of the podcast and because of some video stuff I've done, that I find ADR really distracting. So I get his point that ADR is a problem and is frustrating and can take you out of a movie when you can't help but hear it. But I also, it's better than not hearing it at all, I think. He might be the one to prove me wrong, but it's an issue.
I agree that is maybe the biggest knock against Tenet, is how much of it is difficult to just understand the dialogue. It doesn't bother me as much as a lot of people. I've seen a lot of complaints on the film Twitterverse, but it is annoying. It is perhaps overly. He could address it a little more. The two music cues that I wanted to highlight are the first one comes second, because we're going to go back in time because it's Tenet, and it's the scene when they're stealing the algorithm, what they think is plutonium-241, or what the protagonist thinks is plutonium-241 at the time, on the highway, the highway chase scene. And there is a shot where they get a fire truck in on this so that they can get the ladder and go over to the truck that's carrying the algorithm. And there's this one shot where John David Washington throws on the fire jacket and jumps onto the fire truck, and it just cruises onto the highway. And do you know the sound that comes in right there? Can you picture it in your head?
I remember the scene. I don't remember the sound.
There's this amazing moment in the soundtrack where it kind of like it's got that very inverted feel. It's somehow building but pulling back at the same time, and it's perfect. I put on that song as I was heading out on my bike earlier today, and it cued in at just the right moment as I was pulling out with the part that is him on the fire truck, and it was mind-blowingly awesome. It was great. Highly recommend.
For me, it's all about that final battle sequence. I think the saving grace of that sequence is the way the music inverts, which is very similar to did you ever play the video game Braid? BR.
Yeah.
It's very similar to the music in that game, right?
It does have that similar vibe.
I think works, but again, tick box and then not quite so original after all. Where are you, Chrissy Nolan?
Get out of here.
Which at this point, I'm just saying to troll you, but the point stands.
I mean, we're all influenced by other things, and this is a pretty damn original movie.
And yet, Brian K. Vaughan and that guy from Montreal who made Braid, I think he's from Montreal.
I think that we can knock him for a lot of things, but he's trying to put original IP out there.
I know he is, and that's why it's so fun to pick it apart in the small moments where he fails.
The other music cue, though, is when the protagonist and Kat, John David Washington and Elizabeth Debicki, they cut to them standing up above the Amalfi Coast, and he's explaining to her that the Goya has been destroyed, and he wants her to introduce him to Sator. And there's something about the rhythm of their conversation. Both actors are just delivering their lines in such a perfect way, and Göransson found that, and the music cues in at just the right feel, and that's the most ASMR part of the movie. It's a simple conversation. It's just them having a conversation. There's no action to it, but it's this beautiful shot of the Amalfi Coast and their conversation, and the music cues in just right, and it's beautiful. This is a beautiful movie. Like,
it's great to look at.
About it being confusing, about it, which I don't think is a knock. I think that's a reason to watch it another time and enjoy this beautiful scenery more. It's great. I really like it.
Final thoughts. Was that your final thought?
That's most of my final thought. I guess somehow I haven't talked about the protagonist enough and how much I love John David Washington. I watched the first season of Ballers when it first came out. Just a truly atrocious show. I don't care for it at all. It's really bad, except for John David Washington. I was watching it and I was like, dude, John David Washington is amazing. This is the show. Just get rid of everybody else and just have it be him. And then he had Black Klansman come out, and I was just like, this is the fucking guy. Just put him in everything. And then it was announced that this was going to come out. And I've been excited about this movie for over a year. I've been eagerly anticipating this movie. I also love Robert Pattinson. The Lighthouse was one of my favorite movies of last year. And ever going back to like Cosmopolis, like he's just been making weird as movies and just killing it. It's been great. And Elizabeth Debicki, I've made clear my feelings on Widows. Those three people spend 2.5 hours interacting in various parts of the globe and flying off of buildings and crashing fire trucks and sieging bombed out towns. This is a great movie. I love this movie. This is at least a top 3 Nolan movie for me, if not my favorite Nolan movie. It's everything I expected it to be. And for those that didn't enjoy it, I get it. It's not for everyone. It's very weird. And I guess part of the problem is that, Nolan takes up a very large part of the cinemascape right now. He doesn't get very many awards, but he gets very well-funded movies that are very popular. And I get the frustration with that funds are going to Nolan and not somewhere else is at times disappointing. I don't know that he needs all of the funds that he gets for these movies. And I get that frustration, but it is a hell of a movie to watch. And of all his movies, this was the one that from the time the premise came out, I was like, and the cast came out, I was like, that's the Nolan movie for me. And it turned out to be just that. And I really like this movie.
My final thoughts are, I really enjoyed watching this. I will probably watch it again. I don't know if it'll be part of my regular rotation. I'm not a huge rewatcher in general. I tend to be that kind of person who feels guilty if I'm not watching something new. But this is definitely a movie that warrants a few rewatches to get the sense of everything. Might be my favorite Robert Pattinson. Lighthouse is close.
Whoa, hold on.
I'm not sure if
we gotta talk about that. No, you just opened a
No,
whole
we don't. These are my final thoughts. You don't get to interrupt my closing statement, counselor. This is my closing statement, and I will approach the box.
What about Good Time?
For the well. Or approach the well. Good Time was. It's a Safdie movie. It's stressful. Whatever.
What about Damsel?
I'm not doing this right now. These are my closing thoughts. My closing thoughts were and are, which is a very Tenet way of expressing myself. I enjoyed watching this movie. I will probably rewatch this movie. I'm grateful that Julie has no interest in watching this movie because we always fight about time travel. And yes, that is a true statement about our relationship. And I don't understand. I don't even know why. But like whenever we start talking about time travel stuff, we get really heated.
You're just reliving that moment in a somewhat time travel-y manner.
I guess. I liked it. I'm still... Obviously, it's well made, but I think that is still distinct from whether or not it's good. That said,
not even good. Not great. Not not amazing. Not even good.
You've interrupted my closing thoughts a lot, sir. Ratings wise, still going to give this a very good rating. Are we doing fork ratings?
I think we should. I think we should just lean into the IP theft.
So I'm going to go, I think, probably 4.4 forks one time, 4.25. I think where I'm landing.
Strong. Wow.
Yeah. Definitely on the Golden Film Rail Club.
Yeah. Well, I haven't given my fork rating, so we'll see if it's on the Golden Reel Club.
Do it.
Oh yeah, it's 5 out of 5 forks for me. Come on, get out of here.
All right. Well, that was our discussion of Tenet. Took a while, went backwards and forwards a little bit. I think it works.
I think that was also your summary of Tenet. That was that was beautiful.
I will link to the somebody on Reddit put together, I thought, a pretty good graphic representation of the timeline of the movie. So I will link to that in the show notes for this episode. Jesse, is there anything you would like me to link to in the show notes?
No, I think that graphic representation did help me as well. I think that's a good one to check out. Oh,
do you want people to follow you on Twitter or not?
No, I mean, it's fine. I'm at Grove Jesse on Twitter. You don't need to follow me. I'm not.
Do you want people to follow you on Letterboxd?
Oh yeah, follow me on Letterboxd. That sounds better. I'm at Linton Fellows. LITON FELLOWS. I like Letterboxd a lot more. I'm much more active on Letterboxd than anything. So that'd be the spot to find me if you want to talk about movies. And I promise not to be an unapologetic Nolan stan. I like lots of movies. Nolan. I give this a 5 out of 5, but it's not my favorite movie. It's not the only movie out there. There's much better movies out there than anything Christopher Nolan has on offer. I think there's a lot of hyperbole in film Twitter, and I'm as guilty of it as anybody. But come talk to me about movies. I love just talking about movies.
Awesome. Well, thank you for talking to me about this movie. We argued less than I thought we would.
I thought we would argue a little bit more. I still thought we argued some, and that was good. I enjoyed.
I thought we argued less than I thought we would, so I think we met in the middle, Tenet style.
Oh, nice. I love it. So should we do, there's one question left, which is bungee jumpable a word?
Yeah. Who gives a shit? It's fine.
It's beautiful. All right. I think that does it.
Sort of. You guys are sort of, Jesse.
You didn't. All right. Yeah. Sort
okay, no, I'll do
of.
that. Come back next time for a whole lot more science. Did it backwards.
Oh my God. I feel like I'm living in a Twilight world.
Wow. Editing by Rob Heath. Check out the show notes at sciencesortof.com. Follow us online, facebook.com/sciencesortof, twitter.com/sciencesortof. Thank you all for listening. Did that in reverse too. It all comes together. All right. Bye, Jesse.
Later.
How's it going, Rob? So sort of like Tenet. I'm talking to you through time. That's weird to think about. It's obvious from all the background noise. This is more than just a pee break. Doing something in the kitchen. Hey.
Sorry, the bird also needed food. She was waiting outside the bathroom door when I came out.
I was gonna say, I heard something going on in the kitchen. I was just talking to Rob in the future because I realized what we're doing is also it's a plus for posterity, right?
Oh yeah,
Isn't that clever?